This is the DMCA and ACTA versus academic and professional research, how misuse of this intellectual property legislation chills research, disclosure, and innovation. I still haven't memorized that title.
I'm sorry if I'm out of breath for like the next 5 minutes. I just ran from DEF CON. I just did a presentation there 15 minutes ago, and I'm back here. So but I have a lot of energy to answer your questions now after this. I know there was a reason running across the casino floor. I have a lot of energy to do this. I have an MA, MBA, and JD. I have my own law practice. I practice in the state of Maine, but I'm also going to be practicing in Washington, D.C. soon. I have an office there. And most of my clients, actually right now, all are InfoSec companies, and I work a lot with companies such as Chris's for Chris's company, I'm talking about their First Amendment type of clients that we have. And I'm also an adjunct professor, computer science department, University of Southern Maine. That's where we met. And I'm the director founder of Reverse Space. It's a new hackerspace opening up in Northern Virginia that's connected to a private school. So we're actually teaching kids. We have a hacker high school for kids. And I have to say this is just part of my disclaimer. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer.
And I'm Christopher Mooney. I'm not listed on the presentation material because of a mix-up, but here I am. I'm at Godsfall on Twitter. I have a computer science degree from the University of Southern Maine, a minor in mathematics, which is where I met Tiffany. I'm also a software engineer at Craigslist.org, and I have to say now that the thoughts and opinions expressed in this presentation are not necessarily those of my employer. I'm also the current acting executive director of Project DoD, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that does censorship-resistant hosting and tries to provide services to the public through technology. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is going to come by way of Project DoD, a lot of the abuse cases we're going to talk about. And finally, if you were at DEF CON last year, I also gave the presentation on subverting the World of Warcraft API, which was interesting because last year I was worried about an entirely different aspect of the DMCA than we're going to be talking about today.
We're going to be talking about the DMCA and the ACTA, and there are two parts of the DMCA in which I've done research. One is the one we're going to talk about here, which is takedown notices, and the other one, which I'm not really ready to answer questions about today, and because there's some brand new case law that's very exciting about jailbreaking iPhones. That was an interesting case that came out, and this was in regard to the anti-circumvention measures that are put in for copyrights. If you break the anti-circumvention measures under the DMCA, it's illegal, even if you want to look at the code that's on the other side of it, and that should be fair use. What we're talking about today are the provisions for the takedown notices, such as if you say that you have a copyrighted claim and someone else has taken a part from your book or your movie, and they're using it and they're not, it's not fair use, they don't give you proper attribution for your work, you can file a DMCA 5112 takedown notice to the ISP. And Chris will tell you a little bit how that affects the ISP, but the ISP, to keep their safe harbor, which means that they don't want to be contributorily sued or negligent for the copyrighted material, so they have to go through some procedures and take it down.
Right, so there are elements of notification, and us as ISPs, if we comply with those elements of notification, then we don't share liability with the user. And then there's also a counter notice procedure to allow for abusive takedown notices to be countered. I think that's probably enough to move us forward. And
the ACTA is kind of like the international DMCA, and that's up and coming. The ACTA, if it's passed, many countries will have chilling effects like we have here in the US. I believe that the DMCA is not being used for the purpose for which it was, the legislation was drafted. So I'll tell you about some organizations, including ours, that are working to either amend the DMCA through case law or through changing the legislation itself. I'm going to give you some hypos, and at the end I'm going to tell you if it's real or not. One of these is the unfair corporate advantage. Do you think you can use DMCA takedown notices to harm your competitor? Well, here's the hypo. You run a software company. Your competitor has a very similar product, and they're going to launch about the same time as you. So if you're quick, you want to be first to market, because that's great if you have an innovative product. But your ISP gets a ton of takedown notices, and ISPs don't like these takedown notices. It's too much to deal with. They don't really want to have to consider the fair use aspects of it. Often they say they're not lawyers, and they don't want to be, so they just take your stuff right down. So what happens? Your company's or your competitor site can go down for at least 10 days. That's a statutory period in which we take down sites complaints that we've had to in the past. So another one is silencing discussion of security vulnerabilities, and this is very appropriate for this audience. So you're a security researcher. You have some stuff that's pretty awesome, and you like O-Day stuff. So someone else, though, is doing about the same research you are. So what do you do to compete with them? Okay, you know, maybe you're better at the code with them, maybe you're not. So you decide to use the DMCA. And same thing, you flood the ISP with the takedown notices. You probably think that most of them are illegitimate, but the ISP won't know. They're not lawyers. They'll take it down, and you know that. So it goes down. The last one, and this is the one that's this is the case that we are talking about here. So I already give you a hint. This hypo is true. Let's say you've been injured by medical techniques that your doctor or psychologist used on you. In fact, maybe a family member of yours has died from these techniques. And how would you feel if you weren't allowed to put up a website commemorating your child or a spouse who has died from these techniques? Because every time you mention the doctor's name, your ISP is flooded with takedown notices. That website, effectively, that you've set up is down all of the time. So this is the case we'll talk about in which EFF has been assisting us with some work on this. So are these fact or fiction? Okay, this is the DMCA. I gave you a little bit about already in the intro about what it does, but it was signed into law by President Clinton in 1998. And I'm not going to read you the statutes. I know often these legal talks will go through and read the statutes. I'm not going to do that. The DMCA is to protect copyrights online. It was supposed to preserve fair use. Fair use, however, we believe as a result of the DMCA, and other organizations are discussing this now as well, has silenced fair use. I mean, you should be able to, for instance, I do research, I presented here last year at Blackhat about accessing car computers. There's the newer model make years have a little bit of encryption, so you can't see what's beyond just some of the basic stuff that your car outputs. And should you be able to see what your car computer is storing about you, especially in something that's similar to a black box? But if you go look, you're violating the DMCA. This is a staggering percentage, and this is what we're seeing with the ISP that Chris runs. But 37% of the takedown notices Google receives are invalid. We're not surprised by this, but we're surprised that some of the lawmakers aren't doing more about this. We need more case law. We need some legislation to be changed because a lot of these seem to be for competitive advantage. So the hypo that I gave you, if you have a competitor and you want to take their site down effectively for about 10 days at a time over and over again, every 10 days you slam them with more DMCA takedown notices. And if they're invalid, oh well, that's there's some case law that EFF is trying to set now in the Ninth Circuit in California that says that you should consider fair use. If you don't, this is misuse under Section 5112G of the DMCA. But problem with that is you have to go to a court to prove that this is misuse. You have to get an attorney, most likely, unless you want to self-represent. So it's very burdensome if you run a company or if you just have a blog to be able to handle all these takedown notices, because most ISPs will take them down. They're not like Chris's ISP. All right, I talked a little bit about the ACTA, but this has some other little fixtures to it, such as increased authority for searches and seizure at borders, and the cooperation between law enforcement agencies. So other people here, I know at Blackhat and DEFCON have talked about like laptop search and procedures, and I'm not going to go really into a discussion about that, but if the ACTA is actually, if the agreement is signed with the signatory states, it's going to be more challenging to cross the border with a laptop that has material on it that may or may not be copyright infringing. So the ACTA is going, no one really knows a lot about it, and this is something that's very interesting. It's all being discussed behind closed doors. One of the ways that we know about some of the provisions of the ACTA is that some documents have been leaked. And it's really a shame, but President Obama has not, he has contributed to some of the closed door discussions. But recently a draft was released, I believe it was in April of this year. And I think we have a link to this in our slides, but you can go look at what the ACTA says. But this is not the type of legislation that we really want to be discussed behind closed doors. Here are the proposed parties to the ACTA. There's the draft, April 10th, 2010. That was released to the public. But before then, I was getting research from this, and EFF was as well, by documents that we'd found online that were leaked. So if the ACT is passed, a lot of other countries will have chilling effects that we are talking about here in this presentation.
So a couple notes about the talk. There's a couple different ISPs, and most people, I think, think about the last mile internet service provider, the people that would provide you DSL or cable access, and that's not the type of ISP we're talking about in this talk. However, those ISPs are also subject to the DMCA, and there are some really startling things. I've spoken with people, and there's some really startling consequences of the DMCA for those users as well. What we are talking about is the type of internet service provider that is a hosting provider. So they look a lot like providing web content. Hosting providers that provide web content, Facebook or Twitter, those types of providers. And why is this talk even relevant after 10 years of the DMCA? Well, in our experience through Project DoD, we've seen an increasing number of ISPs that don't allow for, remember I talked about that counter notice procedure, that aren't even allowing for this counter notice procedure. As of about 3 years ago, we started to see a real ramp up in the number of users that were kicked off of providers when their content clearly showed what it was fair use. So I think the abuse is getting a little bit worse. This particular piece of legislation is being exported to other countries. There's the C-32 in Canada, which also has takedown provisions and digital lock things and everything. And then there's a digital economy bill in the UK, and of course the ACTA, which is international. So I just want to give a quick overview of Project DoD. It's DoD.net. It's a volunteer-run 501c3 charitable nonprofit. It looks a lot more like an open source development community, except that we also provide service on top of that. We're funded entirely by donations. Our biggest project right now is the hosting project, which is the project that has most of these abuse case examples coming towards us. And about 12 years ago, we started hosting the needy. And that is to say, people that couldn't afford hosting 12 years ago is very expensive. And over the years, hosting's sort of gradually moved into this commodity market. And as a result, users that host content that's a little bit marginal, or maybe even not even a little bit marginal, are seeing themselves kicked off of providers because the second they get a complaint, the profit margins aren't large enough for the ISPs to really stand up for those users. So over the years, we didn't intentionally gravitate towards censorship resistance. It's just that we didn't put profit above our ideology, and so we wound up getting a lot more of these cases. And so now, about a year ago, we started developing a censorship-resistant jurisdiction-hopping infrastructure that we're going to talk a little bit about. And we should probably mention, I'd like to note here that what Project DoD is not. We are not WikiLeaks, and we are not Pirate Bay. Those needs or issues, I suppose, are being addressed by other organizations. We are talking about First Amendment speech, and especially about critique of, in this case, critique of science and medical techniques. Right. This sort of the clear sort of fair use cases, the people that are being censored that any of us would look at and say, well, that's free speech. How is this happening in our country or in other countries? Okay, I'm going to talk about Project DoD versus Federici. This is a case that's been going on for quite a while, and it's becoming very time-consuming because the takedown notices we get are over and over again for the exact same material, and we have to take it down. Until Chris decided, okay, that's it. We're just going to challenge this. We're going to waive our safe harbor, and we're going to fight this in court. And that's what we've done. So with 2 attorneys in Portland, Maine, because Project DoD is a Maine company with some servers there, and also in California. So we got some Maine attorneys that EFF recommended to assist us with this because it's a big project. And we're going to talk about the DMCA takedown abuses we've experienced through this case. Yeah, and you'll see this in a little bit, but I think that this is one of the more concerning cases of DMCA abuse that you're going to see. This isn't somebody, trying to make a commentary on an image from